Hello, everyone. I will be reading today the land acknowledgement today. We honor the original people, the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples. We recognize that Grand Rapids Community College is located on the land ceded to the United States in the Chicago Treaty of 1821. We also recognize the Grand River Bands of Ottawa Indians as the descendants of original tribes represented at this treaty's signing. We express our gratitude to the original peoples, past, present, and future, who have stewarded this land for generations. We understand this acknowledgement must be coupled with a relationship of advocacy and support for Indigenous peoples. We recognize our responsibility to continuously uphold our commitments towards Indigenous communities. This land acknowledgement recognizes the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples and affirms their history and our efforts to be accountable to their needs. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We're so excited for tonight's event, our final installment of the 30th Diversity Lecture Series. My name is Jamelia Hardley. I serve as the director here in the Woodrick Center for Inclusion and Multicultural Affairs. And it is my pleasure to welcome you into the space, welcome you into the virtual audience, and hope that you enjoy tonight's conversation. Tonight, we are super excited for such a special treat. As we conclude our series, we have truly have an inspiring voice tonight with our campus read, our author, Robin Wall Kimmerer, the esteemed author of Braiding Sweetgrass. Their work beautifully weaves together Indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the deep reciprocal relationships between humans and the natural world that we live in. This year, our lecture series has brought us thought-provoking conversations, meaningful insights, and powerful perspectives for an incredible lineup of speakers. We are deeply grateful, appreciative of everyone who has graced this campus and poured knowledge into us, as well as given us tools to think about to continue some of these different conversations. Every discussion, every question, every shared moment has been an enrichment to our understanding as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, access, social justice, and so much more. As we gather for the final lecture of the academic year, we celebrate not only just the knowledge gained, but the continued commitment to learning, growing, growth, and community. Thank you all for being a part of tonight's conversation, continuing these conversations, and joining us in the learning. And now I join you in welcoming Jax to read our bio.
Hello. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a mother, scientist, decorated professor, and enrolled member of the Citizens Potawatomi Nation. She is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants, which has earned Kimmerer wide acclaim. Her first book, Gathering Moss, A Natural and Cultural History of Mosses, was awarded the John Burroughs Medal for Outstanding Nature Writing, and her other work has appeared in Orion, Volterrain, and numerous scientific journals. In 2022, Braiding Sweetgrass was adapted for young adults by Monique Gray Smith. This new edition reinforces how wider ecological understanding stems from listening to the Earth's oldest teachers, the plants around us. Robin's newest book, The Service Berry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World, is a bold and inspiring vision for how to orient our lives around gratitude, reciprocity, and community based on the lessons of the natural world. Robin tours widely and has been featured on NPR's On Being with Krista Tippett, and in 2015 addressed the General Assembly of the United Nations on the topic of healing our relationship with nature. Kimmerer is a SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor of Environmental Biology and the founder and director of the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, whose mission is to create programs which draw on the wisdom of both indigenous and scientific knowledge for our shared goals of sustainability. In 2022, she was named the MacArthur Fellow. As a writer and scientist, Her interests in restoration include not only restoration of ecological communities, but also restoration of our relationship to land. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Botany from SUNYESF, a Master of Science, and a PhD in Botany from the University of Wisconsin, and is the author of numerous scientific papers on plant ecology, biophyte ecology, and traditional knowledge and restoration ecology. He lives on an old farm in upstate New York, tending gardens both cultivated and wild.
Welcome to the live part of the Q&A for our event tonight. Bitaban Garagoshing and Dao, Wabshka Memangwan, Indigenikas. Odawa Kwe and Dao, Mashikan and Dodam, Waganakasing, LTBB Odawa and Dodabendagwas, Gaganwajanon, Dida, Migwech, Lisa Carlson, Jagunashamoan, Indigenikas. The translation for that greeting, I am the one who arrived at dawn. My name is White Butterfly. I'm an Odawa woman, Turtle Clan, member of the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa, people of the Crooked Tree. I live in Grand Rapids, and my English name is Lisa Carlson. I think we are waiting a moment to have Robin join us, and we will begin with the questions. I see a few that have popped up already. Watch for that. Hopefully, those of you joining us also watched the recorded message from Robin. That was pretty amazing. And excited to hear more from her. Which?
Hi, Lisa, it's Robin. I'm here.
Oh, good. Yay. Well, I'm going to jump right in then. We do have a prepared question to begin with. If you are ready.
Sure.
Okay. Can you share the importance of writing Braiding Sweetgrass and what were some of the motivating factors of why you chose to write the book? Please reflect on how writing Braiding Sweetgrass has transformed your own relationship with nature and influenced your current work.
That's a big question. Let me begin with the start of that, of what were the motivations behind writing the book. You know, after a career in trying to find and make a place for Indigenous knowledge as a partner to Western science in terms of ecology and land stewardship, I was deeply aware of the erasure of our knowledge in academia. And so one of my motivations was to write in such a way that students, faculty, the general public really could have a better appreciation for how Indigenous ethics and values could guide some of the tools of Western science, so we could care better for Shkapmikwe, for Mother Earth. So it really grew out of knowing that we needed stories. It's as if I wanted the academic community who have had the chance to listen in just a little bit to the things that had been shared with me. But at the same time, I also, through some of the work of our Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, was routinely encountering folks in my own Native communities where I live and where I've traveled who felt as if they had to choose, that they could, if they were going to engage with traditional ways of thinking, that meant that they couldn't engage with scientific tools. And so I also wanted to make a bridge to say, how could we use these things together, that it doesn't need to be an either or, but it could be an and, if carefully done. And so often it is not carefully done. So I wanted to really create a place to talk about that. So that's the first part of your question. The second part was, how has it changed my relationship? to nature? Is that what you said?
Yeah, your own relationship with nature and influenced your current work.
I don't think it influenced my current relationship with nature at all. That is so deep and intrinsic for me that a writing product, I don't think would change that. I don't know what could change that, nor do I want it to change. But how does it change my work? Um, so interesting. I never expected, Lisa, that the book would have the kind of wide readership that it does. And having invited people into a worldview of reciprocity, having asked people to give your gift on behalf of the land, I now feel really accountable to that invitation and to the tremendous response from readers. And so it's very much changed my work in that I find myself really on the road a lot, talking to various folks who are waking up to Indigenous knowledge as the missing pieces in the environmental and social crises that we face. So it has greatly changed my work in that I really, well, I am a scientist. I'm not doing scientific research at this point. It seems too urgent to share the message around Indigenous guidance for sustainability.
Wow, miigwech. I have a question that has come in from the audience. This question: is a capitalist society inherently unsustainable? And if so, how should we change our behavior?
What an important question. And as perhaps the questioner knows, I was wrestling with that very question when I wrote the essay that became the book, The Serviceberry. And the truth is that I'm a botanist, not an economist, so it's hard for me to answer that question in any specific economic detail, right? Because there are lots of forms of capitalism. The particularly aggressive, exploitive, cutthroat capitalism, as is practiced in much of the United States, is absolutely not sustainable. The fundamental assumptions of endless economic growth, the assumptions of manufactured scarcity, of the commodifications of the commons, those things that in Anishinaabe culture we think of as gifts, are somehow rendered as property and commodities and made scarce by market forces, that is unsustainable. I would point to the fact that there are other models for capitalism, like the capitalism as practiced in Nordic countries, which has much more of an orientation toward serving the commons, serving the common good. So I would say that capitalism as practiced in the United States today is not sustainable. And so that's why I was really inquiring as a botanist. I don't know really much of anything about economics, but I do know something about the economy of nature. And so I was really asking the question of how does the natural world deliver goods and services, as it were, in an economy, and to think about our teachings around the intelligences and the instructions that the living world can give us about how we can live. And so looking at the circular economies of nature, in which the capitalist imperative to accumulate more and consume more and hoard more, that a sign of status is that you have more than others, right? As opposed to in an indigenous economics, and I think in the economics of the living world, it's not about hoarding, it's about being a conduit for passing that gift, those goods and services, as it were, on to others so that everybody can thrive, where abundance comes not from hoarding, but from sharing.
English. I have another audience question. What would or should legal rights for non-human species look like?
I'm really glad to hear this question, and it's one of those things that I would love to hear what people in the audience are thinking about as well, because I am very much grounded in our teachings of the personhood of all beings, that trees and rivers and mountains and the squirrel that I see outside my window right now, that they are our relatives. They're not resources, right? They are persons. They are not persons of the way we are. I'm not saying that they are like humans. Oh, they are like themselves. They are sovereign, intrinsic beings. And the rights of nature movement is an attempt in Western jurisprudence to recognize that, isn't it? To say that other living beings are not our property, they're not commodities, they have rights as well. So, having said that, I'm really in awe of the rights of nature as led by indigenous communities. The Maori work with recognizing the rights of the Whanganui River, with the tribal constitutional changes at White Earth, at Klamath, in Ponca, where folks have changed their own laws to recognize the sovereignty of more than human beings. But when I look, while I embrace this, I also have a little discomfort with the idea of this being a rights-based movement, because it really centers Western legal thinking, doesn't it? Colonial thinking about rights, whereas I would like to think of how we imagine this transformation to recognize the personhood of other beings, not in a rights framework, but in a responsibility framework. And I don't yet know what that looks like, which is why, as I said at the outset, I would love to talk about this and hear how others are thinking about it. It may be that, given the world we live in, dominated by Western legal thought, that the expedient way to protect the rights, the well-being, I should say, of more than human beings is rights of nature. But I think it might be the expedient way, but not necessarily the exactly right way.
Good. I'm going to go back to one of the prepared questions we have. Why do you think some academics are adverse to creating knowledge, doing research, or learning about the world in non-Western or from cultural traditions?
Yeah, this is a question I have, been wondering about for these earrings will not stay here. Gravity. This is a question that, throughout my academic career of many decades now, I have wondered about. And one of the most straightforward answers to this perceptive question is they've never been taught. When I think about my academic colleagues, some of whom really are open to Indigenous ways of knowing and in the embrace of Indigenous science, but where would they have learned about it? In their entire academic training as scientists, for the most part, they've never even been taught the correct history of Turtle Island, let alone exposed to Indigenous science and ways of knowing. So on my good days, I say, well, they're ignorant because we have an educational system which is attempted to erase our knowledge. So how would they know? And that it is a process of planting that knowledge garden together and helping them know. But as I said, on like good days, that's how I think about it. But there is also undeniably a kernel of arrogance of the Western tradition of scientism. I like to differentiate science from scientism. To me, science as a way of knowing, of curiosity and questioning and evidence building about the nature of the living world. In science, where we should be open to all explanations. Let's look at them. Let's try to understand how they might work and what they offer. But scientism is this biased perspective that says Western science is the only and most valid way to understand the living world. And so oftentimes I think science and scientism get entangled with one another. And so I think it's the job of scientific institutions, academia, to really call out scientism and open the door to consideration of multiple ways of knowing.
Uh-huh. I'm going to go back to an audience question here. What is the medicine we can give to Winnebago? In your book, you spoke of the blackthorn. What do you think is the blackthorn for the Winnebago culture we are up against?
Yes, this is a careful reader. Thinking about what is the Wendigo medicine, and and when I called out buckthorn, I called it out because it's an emetic, right? It is a purgative. It is a powerful medicine that cleanses the body in a almost violent way, a violent and unpleasant way. And I named that as the medicine because to me, this cleansing of Wendigo spirit is necessary to, and what I mean by that kind of cleansing is essentially unlearning what Western society has forced upon us as a way of being, and the values of accumulation, the values of selfishness and self-aggrandizement, right? Of hyper individualism. I think we have to let go of those things before we can really understand a different way of knowing. And part of the medicine for Wendigo seems to me to be associated with a vision of what do we mean by the self. In Western economics and Western thinking, we have the assumption that every individual will act on the basis of maximizing their own self-interest, right? Evolution suggests that that's how things work as well. Individuals will maximize their self-interest, even at the expense of others, which is Wendigo, right? So to me, what we need is an expansion of what the self means. If by the self you really mean me, this physical individual, and maybe my own relatives, but what if the self includes the food that we have just eaten? What if it includes the plants? What if it includes the medicines that have healed us? What if it includes the oxygen that the forest has given us? That's a self too, right? And I think that's where the medicine lies, is to think of ourselves as members of this big kinship network, so that when we think of self-interest, we know that I can't be well or wealthy if the water is not well. I can't be well if the soil is not well. And to me, that's the medicine. But the buckthorn comes first to get rid of all of that that notion of the hyper individualism and replace it with the sense of kinship.
Rich. That's a kind of a good segue for this next question. Let's see. I'll plug in my monitor so I don't run out of battery here in a minute. Okay. Do you have any advice for the backyard botanist, for friends and neighbors that want to get out into their local habitat and acknowledge plants who live there?
Oh my gosh, yes, I love this question. That too is medicine, right? How can we protect our neighbors? How can we nurture our neighbors if we don't even know who they are? And I love that the questioner said, in my backyard, because those are the ones, that's the place where you have the most influence. And I think about so many of the herbalists who teach that the plants in your yard are the ones who have come to you. And so they're the ones to begin knowing. And, I think maybe the answer one expects from a botany professor is to say, oh, go get a field guide and learn the names of all the plants. Well, that's an awesome thing to do. But what I tell my own students is, let's not go there quite yet. Let's get to know them first, and then we can add names in botanical Latin, or we could add names in Anishinaabe, or we could have the names that we make up because we have spent so much time with those plants that they reveal their names to us. So to me, it's sitting quietly, looking at what's going on, tasting things, smelling things, touching things. Sometimes there are plants that I'll forget. I'm like, oh, who are you? What is your name? And I can't remember. And then I touch them, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I know who you are, because there's the physical memory of, and our other senses, our other ways of knowing. Sometimes the fragrance of a plant will be the key to its personality, to its position. So I would say full sensory engagement with the plants in your backyard. And I'm not against having a field guide to then learn their names. One of the reasons for that is that it helps you look more closely. Let me tell you just a tiny story about that. In teaching my own students, who sometimes are real beginners at knowing one plant from the next, they get a little bit afraid because they think, like, wait, you're telling me that Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot, is a medicine and a food and it's delicious, but the plant that looks just like it is poison hemlock and is deadly. Well, that's true. But if you really look at them, it would be really hard to mistake them one for the next. Yeah, they both have white flat flowers, but their leaves are different, their growth is different, their color is different. And it's because we've forgotten how to look and how to really see. So yes, it's important to put names on things, especially if you're going to put it in your mouth. You need to know for sure who that is. But I think it begins with really deep looking, and a field guide will help you to look more carefully. If two things look the same to you, but the field guide then says, oh, well, check it out. Check out the petioles. Check out the nature of the thorns, and then you'll see they're really very different. I'm sorry, I'm just going on and on because you've asked me how to know and love plants. And then I can't stop myself.
Passion. You can write a whole book about that, right? Yeah. Oh, let's see. I'm going to go back to one of our prepared questions. Gonna have time here. What advice do you have for advocates and allies who would like to push this work forward?
And by this work, I'm not sure what is meant, but do you know, Lisa?
I'm assuming it just means for the teaching of our indigenous ways, within our culture and our current environment, I would guess.
Yeah, great.
Mhm.
I think the advice that I would have, especially right now, there are, a wonderful emergence of Native writers on this topic. And so I would, encourage everybody to go reading. I think about Lee Joseph's new book, Held by the Land, Dan Wildcat's Indigenuity, um, Wendy Genius's book. There's just so many great examples. So moving forward, I think that when I think about moving forward, I think about sharing this knowledge, developing courses in the university, since this is the university audience, or in land protection groups of all sorts, who want to embrace Indigenous science, knowledge, and land management, to not only read, but also to listen to the practices of the people who are the original stewards of the land in your place. And because, as we all know, Indigenous knowledge is incredibly place-based. And so the people of the place are going to have a really different perspective on
Miigwech. Let's see. Back to one of the questions from the audience. Maybe you kind of touched on this, I think. In the teaching that you've done, are there specific syllabus policies you've used in classes that help enhance the values you try to instill in students?
Yes, and I'm really glad you've asked that because when I first began teaching, I taught the way I was taught. I simply replicated the kind of syllabi that I experienced, and so I've really tried to do otherwise, and while still maintaining what I required to do at the university. And so the way that I do that is to build into my syllabus what I think of as multiple ways of knowing. I'll build in Indigenous presence of Indigenous science and ways of knowing. But even more than that, what I try to do is to recognize that I think about our medicine wheel teachings, that we know intellectually, we know physically with our senses, right? But we also have emotional intelligence and we also have spiritual ways of knowing. And I want to make room for all of those ways of knowing in my syllabus. And that is not what a typical Western science syllabus looks like. A Western syllabus doesn't require the students to tell a story, doesn't require the students to share their knowledge outside of academia, but I put that in all of my syllabi because I think it's really important. I give my students a mix, again, in science classes, I give them a mix of the expected technical reading and stories and essays and poetry to reinforce that idea that there are lots of ways to learn, lots of sources of knowledge. And if we can encourage our students to, even within themselves, honor this intellectual pluralism of more than the intellect, then I think that makes them more open and tolerant of engaging different bodies of knowledge, such as Indigenous science.
Right. I think we have time for this one last one, audience. It says, hello, I'm an average Joe type from Southern California. I have read Braiding Sweetgrass, Gathering Moss, Serviceberry, and currently reading The Democracy of Species. These works have made me fall in love with Mother Earth and her gifts. How do you keep positive with so much destruction and powers working against our Earth? P.S. You have changed my life in so many ways. I am so grateful to you.
Oh. Well, I want to say miigwech to all the questioners, and to this questioner, I want to say your transformation that you speak of. I want to acknowledge that you changed your life. Stories changed your life, right? Um, and that you were courageous enough to open your mind and experience to another way of knowing. And and that's what I hope my writing and my work does is to help expand our imaginations of of what is possible. How do I keep positive? Well, there's a lot to that. Loving the earth. Um, how can you not be positive when the earth is so joyful and resilient and full of gifts? It just gives me, I don't know, I feel sometimes kind of like I can photosynthesize in the gifts, that the land gives so much that it gives me what I need to keep going, even in times of profound discouragement and despair, like in the moment we are living in right now. When I think about, a career for me, dedicate the things that I have dedicated my career to are of course under fire at this exact moment. More than under fire, they've been thrown in the dumpster. And I could be in despair about that. Sometimes I am, but in fact, really, what it just does is makes me feel even more empowered to do the work, on behalf of the living world. We live in a time of great crisis. We live in a time when the choices that we make matter, and knowing that we have that agency, that our choices matter, really helps me as well. Thanks for asking.
Miigwech. Um, is, are we concluding right here at the 7:30 mark or?
Yes, we
Yes.
have reached our time.
Okay.
So thank you for leading our Q&A discussion, Lisa.
My
And
pleasure.
Robin, thank you so much for your time and your effort and your wisdom shared today in this space. It is our hope that things that were discussed, things that we take away from the pre-recording, in the readings, and continue to indulge and really get involved in sharing what we've learned in this space with other folks, so that the learning continues, the conversations continue as well. With that being said, again, thank you so much. We hope you have an amazing evening. And if you have any questions or things from us, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to field those questions as well. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Bamapi.
Bamapi.